Ask Dan Schneider. Susan writes in and asks me that uh, after myself, who do I consider the greatest poet of all time? I think I've answered this before in several other forums, but numerically I would go with Rainer Maria Rilke, although since he's translated, I've sometimes given some of his poems a boost. In terms of numerically, in terms of the English, you could argue Robinson Jeffers or Walt Whitman or Wallace Stevens. In terms of the highest points, probably Hart Crane, Sylvia Plath was certainly influential. Um, the love poems of Pablo Neruda. Um, it's a difficult thing to discern because there are different forms that people use. How do you compare uh, the high elevated tones of a Plath or a Crane against the equally high but somehow more muted tones of a Wallace Stevens with the sort of ecological and monologue like Robinson Jeffers poems or the Whitman poems that have that biblical kind of cadence. Um, so I would throw a handful out there, and again, it's going to be mostly the English language poets, and the American poets of the 20th century dwarfed all the rest from Australia, Canada, England, the UK. Germany had Rilke, and maybe a couple of other people you could argue. There were two or three top Russian poets, but uh, again, probably Rilke in terms of numbers of poems, and he did write poems that were great in two different languages, four or five in French, the rest in German. That's a feat that even I'm not going to accomplish. But there's my answer, I guess. Rilke, Crane, Stevens, Jeffers, Whitman. Those are probably the top four or five in terms of just numbers of great poems.